Recently, Sam Harris was answering some questions from his fans, and he spoke a bit about his disagreements with Noam Chomsky.
Can you comment on your spat with Noam Chomsky? Your initial critique of him in The End of Faith, do you stand by it? I'm a big fan, but I just don't get this. Well, I'm not aware of having a spat with him. He's actually taken a few shots at me online, but we've never met, and I'm not aware of him having read The End of Faith or having noticed what I've said about his politics. So to some degree, we could just be talking on parallel channels here. But I just think there is a kind of moral confusion expressed in his political writing which ignores intention as a basis upon which to evaluate certain human behavior. At the end of the day, he simply wants to use body count as the only metric to discuss the moral stature of two sides in a conflict. So if we kill a dozen children unintentionally, well, that's every bit as bad as doing it intentionally. Okay, that, I think, is a bad way to look at human conflict. I think the people who are intending to kill children are different than the people who are intending to kill the people who are killing children and are accidentally killing children in the process. It's a huge difference. You have to ask yourself, what kind of world does any group or society want to create? How do they want the world to be? And what would they do if they had all the power? And when you ask that question, you get very different answers for specific groups, no matter how much misery and death is happening on both sides of a conflict. And when you look at World War II, it was just a horrific wastage of human life. But the difference between the Allies and the Nazis was absolutely categorical. What sort of world did the Third Reich want to create? Okay? And what did we want to create on our side? We did horrible things. The firebombing of Dresden, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Absolutely grotesque acts of violence, where hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people over the course of the war, died. But what sort of world were we trying to build? What were our intentions with respect to the Germans and the Japanese, really? Well, you saw our intentions, because after the war, we did not murder everyone. We helped rebuild their societies. So we're not perfect, but we were different from the Nazis. So you can't just look to body count merely to judge the rightness or wrongness of human behavior. And Chomsky seems to discount intentions across the board and only look at body count. And if you do that in any given instance, you come away with a perverse description of what's happening in the world. And you come away believing the kinds of things that people influenced by Chomsky tend to believe, whether it's Glenn Greenwald or any other person who's drunk this Kool-Aid. And you can end up saying things like, the United States is the greatest terrorist state in human history, right? Or some other such nonsense. There is a difference between the Dick Cheneys of the world and the al-Baghdadis of the world. And it is crucial that people on the left understand that. And as far as I can tell, Chomsky has been a source of pure moral confusion on this point.
All right, so as often happens when we discuss these issues, I'm in the unfortunate position of being a fan of Harris and Dawkins and the New Atheists, as well as a fan of Chomsky and Greenwald and Scahill and people like that. So inevitably, when I talk about these issues, I get people lashing out at me from both camps, where they say I'm too much of an apologist for Harris and the New Atheists, or people say I'm too much of an apologist for Greenwald and Chomsky. So that's definitely going to happen. I've accepted that at this point. It is what it is. No matter what, I can't please everybody when I talk about these things. I'm just breaking it down as I see it. So first of all, let's go directly to his main criticism. Is that a legitimate criticism of Noam Chomsky? That Noam Chomsky focuses more on quantitative issues than qualitative issues? I'd say yes. I think that's a fair criticism of Noam Chomsky. I mean, I also have other disagreements with Chomsky. I think he's way to the left of me on domestic and economic policy. But on the idea that he focuses too much on the quantitative and not enough on the qualitative, I think that's a fair point. But the thing that frustrates me about Harris is that he seems unaware that the criticism of him is the polar opposite. And I think that that's also merited. So I do think it's a legitimate criticism of Chomsky that he focuses too much on the quantitative and not the qualitative. But Harris focuses too much on the qualitative and not the quantitative. So let's back up Harris for a second. So Harris's point is basically, yes, if you tally up the body count, it's true that America has killed more people than ISIS, but does that mean that America is worse than ISIS? Of course not. That's ridiculous. So I agree with him in that respect. He's making a good point in that respect. But the deeper idea here that Harris is getting at is the idea that America is basically altruistic. So in his mind, when we kill civilians, it's always an accident. But what people like myself, and I would guess Noam Chomsky, are trying to get across to Harris and other people is that that's not true. That's empirically not true. We know that that's not true. I mean, we've covered stories on this show, just to give one example, where we did drone strikes of a funeral when we knew that women and children were at the funeral, but we also knew that Taliban operatives were at the funeral, and they just decided, fuck it. I mean, we'll get the Taliban guys, so if there's some collateral damage, we know we're going to kill the civilians, fuck it, let's do it. So the idea that, like, it's always an accident when we kill civilians, that's just not correct, and those are issues that Chomsky focuses on, and issues that, unfortunately, I think Harris doesn't discuss nearly enough. And also, to attack the idea that it's like, well, we mean well, so therefore it's totally different. It is different, for sure, but it's not totally different. So, for example, the U.S. has openly supported dozens of fascist dictators during the Cold War and after the Cold War. And we didn't do it because we're benevolent and we want a better system of government for the people in South America, for example. No, we did it because we wanted more geopolitical power and control, and we wanted natural resources. I mean, the term banana republic comes from the fact that we overthrew a government so that our banana corporations can come in and take the fucking bananas. So it's not the case that we're altruistic and we mean well, and then whoops, we accidentally killed civilians. No, it's more the case that our focus is primarily on geopolitical power and control and maintaining a grasp on these things and keeping the order as it is right now and taking natural resources for ourselves. So when we support these fascist dictators who did all these horrible things, it wasn't like we expected that they were going to set up a better system and that, we're helping the people in these places because of that. We knew that they were doing fucked up shit, and we often looked in the other direction because our main concern was not humanitarian. And also, what Harris is getting at is the idea of murder versus manslaughter. And what he's saying is Chomsky disregards the fact that there's a difference between murder and manslaughter. Chomsky makes it seem like America is the worst by far and away because we murder more people than, regimes that were outwardly terrible, whether it's the Nazis or ISIS or other jihadists or whoever. And, I get that, Sam. I understand what you're saying, and there is a fair point there that sometimes Chomsky might go too far in his criticism of America, and he might not make a distinction between intentions. But my response to that is, Sam, both of those things are crimes. Murder is a crime, and manslaughter is a crime. So when Noam Chomsky comes out and speaks more about what we do in the world, the reason he's doing that, he's spoken about this before, he mentioned it in his debate with William F. Buckley a long time ago, the reason he's doing that is because he says, we are responsible for our actions. I'm paying for that. I'm paying for it when we do something fucked up. That's why I'm focusing on this. Because I don't want us to be involved in any way, shape, or form with anything like that, whether it's murder, manslaughter, or anything else that might be negative and affect people in a bad way. I just want Sam to recognize that, okay, we're good guys, they're bad guys, is not a sufficient explanation. That's not enough for an Iraqi mother who lost her son or her daughter or some other family member. That's not consoling. You can't just throw this giant blanket, this generalization over what the U.S. does as, well, we meant well, so it's okay. No, since it's us doing it, we are responsible for those actions. So we can, at the same time as we slam the actions of ISIS and al-qaeda and other jihadists and Christian fundamentalists and the KKK, we could slam all those actions and then also at the same time say, hey, the thing we did in Vietnam when we used Agent Orange and napalm and killed civilians, that was fucked up. Hey, when we overthrew the Iranian government, that was fucked up. Hey, when we support occupation in Israel-Palestine, that's fucked up. Hey, what we did in South America, that's fucked up. we're able to have this conversation in a more nuanced way where it shouldn't be just us versus them. It should be these actions they did are fucked up and these actions we did are fucked up, and let's just cut out all the areas where we fucked up. So I think what we need here is a more nuanced conversation and not just a conversation about us versus them and intentions versus good intentions versus bad intentions, and we shouldn't boil it down to the most base level conversation because that doesn't help anybody.